Hey everybody, it's Frankie-Lou. We're here in the Grow Together Homestead Kitchen where I am using some of my favorite harvest products from the growing season now that the snow has come. And that's green tomatoes. Now I know a lot of folks just are interested in ripening up tomatoes, but one of my favorite preserves actually uses green tomatoes as they are. I've got big cases and cases of tomatoes ripening up in my cool closets right now. But I also want to make use of some of the green tomatoes, and I've got lots of them that friends have given me or that I actually have from my own harvest that I'm going to use up today. What I'm going to prepare is not a hot sauce, not a salsa, not a relish. It's kind of a mixture of all those things together. It's really, really spicy and extremely flavorful. So if you like bland food, you probably won't be a big fan of this. But if you like a lot of flavor and you like to feel that when you're using a condiment on your food, you might like this. What I'm making today, I call it fermented green sauce, okay? This is a really fun sauce that I like to make because I really enjoy fermenting foods. I find that that fermenting element adds so much delicious flavor. So I really enjoy fermenting food. Fermented food also can be really good for you. That fermenting that takes place, that good bacteria that's in there, it's actually really good for building up your tummy's probiotics. So it's something that I like to have around. Although I will say that often when I create a big batch of this and I want it to be shelf stable for a long time, I do can it in a hot water bath canner. Just to keep it so that I can keep it on a shelf for a year. Because if you don't do that and you just use it as and you just prepare it as a fermented food and store it in the refrigerator, you're looking at 6, 7, 8 months that you want to be eating that. And I don't have enough room in my fridge for all the sauce that I want. So I usually stick 1 jar in the fridge to use and can up the rest of it in my hot water bath canner. But let's get to the recipe. It's pretty fun and pretty easy. I make mine extra spicy and I add a lot of spices and taste elements. You can tone this down if you want. That's the good thing about fermenting. It is pretty forgiving because that good bacteria does do a good job of creating a safe balance of acid in most of your canning projects. You can play a little bit with this recipe if you find that mine's just a little bit too strong for you. So let's get started here. Now, I've got some lovely green tomatoes that I'm going to use today. These are really nice ones that were actually gifted to me from a friend. And I found some tomatillas. So when tomatillas are around, I will use tomatillas as well as tomatoes. I'll use about half and half. And tomatillas are wonderful, okay? If you haven't used them before, they are the main ingredient if you're making a true traditional salsa verde, Mexican style. But this isn't really a true salsa verde because I am using green tomatoes and some other ingredients. If you haven't played with tomatillas yet, I do suggest giving it a try because they are quite lovely. One thing I will say though, they really need to be washed more than you can possibly imagine, okay? I pre-washed these today so that they're all ready to go. I've got just over a pound there, I would say, of nice tomatillas. They are grown with a papery husk over them. And on their exterior, when you put them in water, they have a very, very soapy residue. And it's remarkable how much rinsing and washing it takes to get that soapy residue off. These were washed and rinsed about 4 or 5 times before the water started being clear and before I could start feeling that they don't have that sticky, soapy residue on them. So you want to do that because that's a flavor that isn't as nice. It's not a flavor profile I want in my sauce, so you're going to make sure you want to get those nice and washed. That's the number 1 tip. If you don't have tomatillas, don't worry about it, okay? It's just something I do when I see them around. I grab them, especially if I have green tomatoes, because they do work so nicely together in this sauce. But this sauce is nice even without the tomatillas, if you can't happen to find any of those. Okay, so I'm going to create a couple jars of this, about this size today, almost 2 liters, I would say. Big mason jars that I'm going to create. So my main ingredients are a pound of unblemished green tomatoes and a pound of tomatillas. Or if you don't have the tomatillas, 2 pounds of green tomatoes, okay? When you are looking to ferment food, because you are having a natural process happen of basically food being broken down by bacteria, you want to make sure that you're using pretty unblemished, pristine food, okay? You don't want to you do not want to be introducing any mold into your ferment brew. So it's a really good idea to make sure that you're choosing your best, your firmest, your nicest fruit for this, okay? And your nicest veggies, because otherwise you could be creating a science experiment that you really weren't looking to do, rather than some nice delicious sauce. All right, now I have got in my oven here, I have pre-sterilized my big mason jar that I'm going to create this in today. That's another really good idea. Not a step you want to skip out, because as I said, you want to avoid that whole brewing things that you weren't intending. And so I do like to sterilize my jars and keep them warm in the oven until it's time to use them. So I'm going to go get those. Okay, so I have my nice, beautiful, hot, sterile jar here. I've got I've got a couple of them because I'm going to make 2 big jars worth today with this recipe. And I need to prepare a brine. Now the brine is basically, I'm going to do some salt water that I'm going to be percolating these things in. Some people do like to add a teaspoon of yogurt whey to get the fermentation going. But honestly, I've found that's not necessary. I've done it both ways. And I find that just using the salt water and putting it in a nice spot on my counter where I can keep an eye on it has worked great for me with all my fermenting. So for my brine, I like to use about 100 mils of sea salt or kosher salt and 2 liters of filtered water. And I mix that up usually in here, okay? I have pre-mixed some so that you guys don't have to wait and watch me do that. So the ratio that you're looking for a good brine with a hot sauce sort of pickly fermenting brew would be 100 mils of salt to 2 liters of filtered waters. Okay, so that part's easy. So I got my nice hot jar here. It is very hot. And what I'm going to do first is I'm going to put the small ingredients in. I used to mix all this stuff all together in a bowl and then stuff it in the jar. And I actually lost a few batches that way because the smaller ingredients would float to the top and get past my brining stone and actually cause there to be some interaction on the surface, which can cause mold. So the little trick that I do now is I put all the smaller things in the bottom of the jar so that they'll be packed down and held down by the larger items. It's just a little thing that I've started to do in recent years, and it's really made a difference in the amount of fermenting batches that have made it through to the end without molding. Okay, so it's a little trick I do. For this, I want to put in 1 teaspoon of mustard seed. I really like using the dark mustard seeds. I like using the black or brown ones, but hey, if you can't find that, use good old standard yellow mustard seed. I also put in 1 teaspoon of coriander seed, and I am going to whiz this all up in the end so that it's soft, but I do like to have a little bit of chunkiness of the seeds in. Okay, and then 1 teaspoon of cumin. All right, in each jar, that's what I'll put. Each of these 2-liter mason jars. Now, other small ingredients that I want to use. I'm going to put in about half a head of garlic here. Okay, so I got some nice garlic. We have 6 or 7 cloves. I'm just going to remove the papery skin from that. All right, and pop those right in the bottom of the jar. I don't need to chop up any of these ingredients right now because I am going to create a sauce that I'm going to whiz up once it's all perfectly fermented in my, my little Ninja blender. I don't want to do that now because remember how I said that I wanted to stop ingredients from floating to the surface? Well, if I make small things and chop these things up fine now, they are going to float to the surface and there's less chance that I'm going to have a successful ferment, right? So actually, I'm just keeping these things, everything that's going in as intact as possible. I just want to basically break my items open so that the interior surfaces are exposed, and we'll be introduced to the brine, and the brine will work its magic. Okay, so other smaller things that I want to put in here. Now, I'm a huge fan of cilantro. Okay, I know some folks aren't, but I am. So I'm putting cilantro in mine as well. I do love that flavor. And I'm going to put in like a half of one of these, all right? When you are working with cilantro, when you're putting in a ferment, make sure that you do wash it very, very well and dry it, which I've done to this stuff here. Now, the other thing that a lot of people do that drives me crazy with cilantro is pick off the leaves individually and they throw away the stalks. Well, that is just silly because the stalks are extremely flavorful, just as flavorful as the leaves. And they actually, I like the texture too, the crunchiness of it. So I do keep my cilantro intact. I just I wash it, cut off the ends, and I'm going to stick about half a head in there. I'm going to use this. I've also heated this spoon. Push it down into the bottom. So that's the smaller stuff. Okay, now there's also another thing that I'm going to do here that you might think is a little weird, but I really, really love the flavor of like a nice lime zest and the lime as a whole in there, but I don't want the middle part. I don't want the pith because that is bitter. So what I do with my limes, and I'm putting 3 in here, okay? That's a bit excessive. Like I said, I like things really, really tart and really, really flavorful. I use a speed peeler to take off the outer, see, I just want to take out that outer zest, and I go through my limes and I take that outer zest off. I pop that right in there. Okay, I'm going to do that with the 3 limes. And I'll show you what I don't want, okay? The zest is extremely flavorful, but that white pith in between the zest and the flesh is actually pretty bitter. So what I do is once I've speed peeled off the majority of the zest and pop it in, I then use a little paring knife and I peel away all this icky white stuff. It's just a bit too bitter. Yes, it's a fussy little step, but I find that the fermentation process, it actually can accentuate any bitterness that's existing already. And so if you put the most bitter part of something in, like a lime, like this pith, you're going to end up tasting that quite strongly in the final ferment product instead of tasting that delicious fruitiness and citrusiness of that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for citrusiness and tartness, not bitterness, okay? So I'm going to just cut that in half, and I'm going to start placing these things that are going to go into my, in a bowl together here, okay? So I'm going to continue with these limes, and then I'll get to the jalapenos. Well, I'm going to put in a substantial amount of jalapeno peppers. If I'm using a pound and a pound, I'm putting in at least 3 jalapeno peppers, and I'm slicing off the tops, cutting them in half. I don't want to cut them much smaller than that because I want to keep the things as intact as possible. I know this is old, so that they're not going to float to the surface, okay? So I'm going to put 3 or 4 of these in. That might seem hot, but like I said, this is more like a hot sauce mixed with a salsa. It's not, it's quite a spicy dish I'm making. Okay, then I want to take my green tomatoes, cut them in half, take off any blemishes. Like, this is a beautiful heirloom tomato that somebody gave me here that they had way too many of, but it has some brown on it. I'm taking that brown part off, okay? Even though I know it's probably got nothing bad going on there, but I want to make sure I'm not playing fast and loose with the possibility of there being any bacteria introduced or mold introduced that I don't want to be introduced to this ferment. I'm going to cut my tomatillas in half as well. Okay. take off any blemishes I see with those. I'll keep working away at that here. Don't want the pieces to be small. Okay, just small enough to stuff nicely in the jar. Just to show you for interest here, the difference between a tomatilla and a tomato. This is the interior of two. This is a tomatilla. This is a tomato. The tomatilla has smaller seeds, okay? It's slightly tartar. It has a slightly different flesh, but honestly, you can treat them quite differently. The tomatilla does have a very distinct flavor though, which is a really nice accent to a lot of different Mexican sort of dishes, but if you can't find them, it's not the end of the world in this dish. Now I'm gonna get these in my bowl here. And last but not least, I like to add onion. I find that it works well with my ferments. Okay, this is a huge onion. I'm only gonna use probably about half of this. Okay, this onion probably weighs close to a pound itself, so I'm going to use about half a pound of onion compared to a pound each of my tomatillas and tomatoes. Okay, cut that in half. All right, so I've got my goodies in here. I'm going to mix them up. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start stuffing these in here. My hands, by the way, have been washed thoroughly because, like I said, you don't want to be introducing too much into this. That's not part of it. You want to get that nice all down in there. I'm going to save some of the largest pieces for the top. We know now why, right? All right, so as this jar is getting full, I'm going to start mashing some things down. Okay, you want to get those spaces filled as much as possible. I'm going to put one of my onion pieces at the top because I know that that's going to hold down a lot of the other ingredients that are below it. One thing that I do sometimes when I get to this point and I want to make sure that stuff stays below is I sometimes have used a cabbage leaf or a horseradish leaf on the top of the ferment underneath my weight because I find that that actually really helps to keep the ingredients in as well. I don't have any cabbage today and I don't have my horseradish leaves have all been harvested, so I'm just putting my onion at the top and I'm going to try to weight this as well as I can. I've got my pre-prepared brine here. Pour that in nicely. I'm pouring it a little slow so the chance, and I'm going to tap it and squish it down a bit. Now, those of you who are fermenting, have done fermenting before, are going, oh my goodness, that's so full, it's going to bubble over. Yes, it is, okay? I've learned a little in the past about some of the issues with my ferments, and I would rather have it over full and bubbling over. I just place those jars on a nice tea towel on my counter if for the bubbling over that happens, then have it under full, okay? It's just one of the things that I've started to do over the years is kind of overfill my ferment jars. You want to do a little bit of tapping. Sometimes I'll go like this and tap it on the sides. Just try to get as much of those bubbles out as possible. Now, if you're planning to do a lot of fermenting like I do, and I honestly almost always have something bubbling away on my counter, at least one, maybe two jars of something, you might want to invest in these wonderful weights, okay? They're available, well, I've seen them even at Canadian Tire in recent years, and obviously online. And they're so wonderful because they fit nicely into the top of your wide mouth jars, or you can get ones that fit into narrow jars as well. They're easy to sterilize, right? Because they're made out of glass. You just boil them in the water and keep them warm in the oven. And then they come with these wonderful burping lids. So these lids are awesome. They're silicone, easy to clean, and they have this little nipple at the top, which allows air to escape, but doesn't allow air to enter your ferment. So since I started using these, rather than opening the jar every couple of days to let out the excess air, I've had far less accidents with stuff kind of practically exploding in my kitchen, and far less of my ferments have gone moldy because I'm not opening these jars up. It's letting things out. And yes, so if you do plan to do some fermenting, I really can't recommend these highly enough. I used to use stones and things, and yes, that works. If that's what you have and you got to use what you got to use, then go ahead and do it. These make an excellent stocking stuffer. It's a wonderful little gift that you can give somebody who's a canning fanatic like myself. Hint, hint. So I could always use a few more, but something you might want to try. Okay, so now I wish I could show you the end product, but I have none of this left from my last time I made it because I do love it so much and I've run out of last year's supply. But I have prepared now 2 wonderful jars. These are going to sit on my counter on a nice clean tea towel, which we'll have to change every few days because there will be some bubbling over. They're going to sit for 2 to 3 weeks. Okay, what you do is you open it after about a 2-week period of time. You start opening these jars, take a sterile spoon and take a taste. If you find that it has that nice tart flavor that you're looking for, and it isn't tasting as salty anymore. If it still tastes really salty, then the fermentation process hasn't been completed yet, okay? It should have a little bit of a nice saltiness, but you want to taste mostly is almost a vinegary tang. If you get that nice little vinegary tang, you know that the fermenting has taken place. I like it really tart, so I tend to leave mine for as long as I can be patient, which has been 3 weeks. And honestly, on one occasion, I accidentally left it for 4 weeks and it was fine. Okay. At that point, you can decide to eat these either sort of as a home pickle, or you can do like I do, whiz this up into a nice sauce and stick it in the fridge, or you can process this in a hot water bath for about 15 minutes in a half-pint jar, and that'll keep it shelf stable for a year. So yes, this is one of my favorites. I will post some, just a quick short to show you when I do the whizzing up so you can see the end product in a couple of weeks, in 3 or 4 weeks. And I hope you'll try it. If you haven't tried fermenting before, please do. It's so much fun, and honestly, you'll be so pleased with the flavor. I have other videos about it. The hot sauces are my favorite, but this is good too. It's not quite a hot sauce. I sort of think of it as a zesty green ketchup that I use on lots of stuff, okay? Because I like a lot of flavor in my condiments. I hope that was helpful. I hope you'll give it a try. Please do subscribe if you're interested in some of the other things we're doing around here. And also make sure that you send me some comments about things that you'd like to see. And as always, I hope you'll take this chance to grow together today. Have a good one.